Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Allen. I am the food quality specialist for USU Extension, and I also work closely with the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food to help with implementation of the FDA produce safety rule. So a lot of you attending today might be small enough that you're actually exempt, or you're maybe qualified exempt, and the entirety of the produce safety rule doesn't apply to you. Some of you might be small enough that you've never really even given that much thought to the FDA produce safety rule. You might be entirely exempt. We're now moving into a point that we're starting to work a lot more closely with some of our small farms, so that we can really start to promote some of these practices as best practices, even if they're not a requirement for you based on the size of your farm or what you're growing. A lot of these things that we're promoting for some of our larger farms are still very good practices to end up with safe produce that goes to the farmer's market or your other buyers. So one of the big things that has happened just in the last couple of months is the FDA has completely reconsidered how they're approaching the irrigation section of the ag water rule that's part of the produce safety rule. So we were actually hoping to spend 3 or 4 hours this year at the Small and Urban Farms Conference just to talk about how to implement the produce safety rule. But with this new proposed change, we have had to put that on hold. So today, what I'm going to do is give you a really brief overview of some of those proposed changes, and then provide you some resources and let you know about some upcoming workshops, so that if you have comments or concerns about what's contained in the new proposed rule, you know how to comment and let your voice be heard. So with that, let's get started. So a really brief background. The Food Safety Modernization Act was a sweeping food safety law that was signed into effect in 2011. The FDA was given the responsibility of creating the rules to implement and regulate the Food Safety Modernization Act. So they created 7 key rules that address food safety, all the way from produce grown on the farm to production and processing of packaged foods, to how those foods are transported or warehoused and then further distributed. The produce safety rule, this section of this, is a brand new type of requirement. We have never actually had a regulatory requirement that addresses on-farm food safety before the produce safety rule. There have been voluntary programs and standards that were described in rulemaking or in regulations. For example, the USDA describes GAP standards, good agricultural practices, and provides some of those requirements if you want to be GAP certified, what you have to do. But it was not a regulatory requirement for farms to participate in GAP or any of these other food safety schemes that were developed for on-farm food safety. So this was the very first piece of regulation that was actually a requirement. You can see on your screen, there are several different aspects of farming that are specifically addressed in FDA code as part of the produce safety rule. What I'm going to talk about today is the agricultural water piece, and very specifically, the pre-harvest or irrigation water. Understand that the parts of that particular section that apply to post-harvest water, that would be anything that you're using to wash or cool or otherwise process that fruit after harvest, fruits or vegetables, that is not being changed. It is only the pre-harvest section addressing irrigation water. So one of the biggest issues that we heard consistently, even from extension people and researchers to people in regulatory capacity, farmers, industry representatives, or commodity groups, all pointed out that irrigation water is not a one-size-fits-all issue. But the FDA, the way that that piece of that rule was written, there was only one way to really be compliant, and that was to develop a microbial water quality profile. If your water quality was outside of those standards, which were based on recreational use water standards established by the EPA, then you were out of compliance. But there were so many different things that that one standard did not take into consideration. All the different types of crops that are grown, the way that that water is applied, is it an irrigation canal or do you have a holding pond? All the way down to what is the climate where you're growing. That could be something that if you are in a very humid area, they're actually seeing that that bacteria can survive for a lot longer than in an arid climate such as Utah. So there were all of these other things that just weren't taken into account with that one size fits all approach that the FDA originally took. So in December of 2021, they issued a proposed water rule. You can reach this on the Federal Register. You can read the rule in its entirety if you choose to. It's a 35-page document, and only 4 of those pages actually contain the new proposed rule. The rest of it is preamble, which talks about financial impacts or environmental impacts, or even just the general considerations that they looked at in coming up with this proposed rule. So there is a public comment period open as required by federal law. That comment period closes April 5th of this year. So we're starting to have a lot of questions come in about how is this going to affect me and what is really contained in that rule. So the new proposed rule looks at using a systems-based risk assessment approach. If you've been to the produce safety training and we talk about wildlife or domestic animals, they're not saying that you have to prevent birds from flying over your crops before harvest. They say you need to come up with a plan if you know you often have large flocks of birds flying over. How are you going to identify produce that might be affected? And what is your plan to prevent that from entering commerce? Meaning we're going to take some flags, we're going to mark it off, and we're not going to harvest this square area a few feet in diameter from where we see the evidence of the birds having flown over. The new approach for the water, the irrigation water piece, is much more similar to that. So you can look at your water system. What is the nature of the water? Does it go past a dairy or a large cattle feeding operation before it comes to your property? Is it completely open, or does it enter a below ground closed system before it reaches your farm? What are your water practices? Are you using drip irrigation, or are you still using a sprinkler system? Are you using any type of treatment for algae or some other issue that might actually also address the microbiological, the bacteriological quality of that water? What are the characteristics of your crops? Are these melons, which we know tend to be high risk? Is it something where, because of how you harvest it, there might be a longer period of time where it sits in an arid environment and those microbes can die off? Other environmental conditions, and then also what other relevant factors are there that are specific to your farm that maybe no one else has to consider? So to help understand some of this, because there's a lot to unpack from that 35-page document, the FDA is holding a series of public meetings where you can actually submit questions ahead of time that then FDA representatives will answer directly as part of that webinar. The first one was on February 14th, but there is a second meeting on February 25th. So if you're interested in attending that and hearing some of the discussion, comments, or more information from the FDA, there will be links in these presentation slides. I'll include a whole series of links, and that will be posted on the Diverse Ag website, so you have access to find those that information on the meeting. The next thing I want to tell you about is our regional meeting. So as part of this, the FDA is working directly with NASDA, the National Association of the State Departments of Agriculture, to have a series of regional listening sessions. We are part of the Western Regional Center to Enhance Food Safety, and there will be 2 listening sessions in our region. The one that Utah is a part of is the Southwestern section. So that includes California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. Our listening session will be held March 11th. This will be with states that have more similar types of irrigation water concerns and questions, as opposed to some of our other regional partners, say, for example, in Washington State, where they have a very different climate. If you would like to attend this webinar, we will be providing this information again as part of this slide set. If you have attended a produce safety training session in the past, you will be receiving this information by email as well. If you have questions, or you're not sure if this particular listening session is appropriate for you to attend, or if you find that the time and the date is just not something you can do, but you have comments or concerns that you would like us as extension partners to share so that it becomes part of that larger discussion, you can reach out to our USU Produce Safety Program Coordinator, Laura Gale. You can reach out to our Utah Department of Agriculture and Food Produce Safety Program Manager, Dave Basinger, who also does GAP and organic, so you may already be familiar with Dave, or you can reach out to myself, Karen Allen. Any of us can take those comments, questions, issues, and bring them up in this listening session or as part of this larger discussion to compile some comments that will then be submitted to the FDA. So all 3 of us hopefully will be available later, starting at 3:30 in the breakout sessions, to answer any questions about the proposed water rule, or even any produce safety questions that you might have that you want to bring up at that point. So that is all I have.